In the midst of the COVID pandemic surge in late 2020 and early 2021, the federal government carried out an unprecedented series of executions, beginning on July 14th, 2020 and ending on January 16th, 2021. The government executed 13 prisoners in total. These 13 executions, carried out in less than 6 months, represented more than 4 times the number of federal executions that had previously taken place in the entire modern death penalty era, and they ended a 17-year gap on the use of the federal death penalty. Given the pandemic surge, our defense teams had to surmount additional challenges of limited access to the courts, access to critical witnesses, and even access to their clients. A remarkable coalition of individuals, including capital defenders, pro bono attorneys, mitigation specialists, mental health experts, investigators, and policy advocates, formed during this time to face the challenges head on. Often at risk to their own safety and well-being, these teams worked day and night on behalf of the 13 prisoners facing execution. This evening, we are honored to be joined by 3 of the advocates who were on the front lines of the fight: federal defenders Sean Nolan and Kelly Henry, and pro bono attorney Katie Ali. We also welcome journalist Maurice Chammah. He reported on the executions and documented many of the problems that arose in the rush to carry them out before the change of administration. The efforts of these extraordinary attorneys and those of many others led to numerous days of executions based on themes recurring in our cases: intellectual disability, mental illness, prosecutorial misconduct, and effective representation. While lower courts repeatedly recognized the need to halt the execution and examine these claims in detail, the US Supreme Court, in unsigned late-night orders through its shadow docket, vacated each and every one of the stays, drawing forceful dissents from Justices Sotomayor and Breyer. On July 1st, 2021, Attorney General Merrick Garland imposed a moratorium on further federal executions while a review of the Justice Department's policies and procedures is pending. The following video tells the story of this unfortunate chapter in federal death penalty history and the heroes who gave everything they had to protect the rights of their clients under unimaginable circumstances.
Hi, folks. How are you? I'm Sean Nolan. I'm the head of the Capital Habeas Unit in the Philadelphia Federal Defender Office. We're a very large office. We represent lots of folks around the country. Sadly, we represented 3 of the 13 people who were executed by the Trump Barr administration last year. And so I'm supposed to talk about that. I'm not sure exactly what to say, but I have a few thoughts. A lot of it is anger. I think that me and my office have ended up being angry about this. And what we've tried to do since that time is figure out how to bottle that anger and use it to continue to do the work and to continue to represent the many, many clients that we have left, including those at Terre Haute. So, when I look back at these 13 executions, the one thing that just jumps out at me is that any of those 13 could have been spared, or all of those 13 could have been spared. Every one of them at some point had a stay of execution in place. As you know, the Supreme Court stayed up late at night over and over again to take away all stays in place to make sure, sadly, that all these executions went forward. I started thinking about this concept of the honor, the courage, and the horror of the work that we do. And as I was going to the prison, I was heading out there on an airplane and then getting ready to go. I was thinking about the courage. I didn't know if I would have the courage to walk in. But what I started thinking about was the movie and the book Just Mercy by Bryan Stevenson. And there was a scene where his client is executed by electrocution, and there's a close-up on his face in that scene. And about the next scene, was him walking into the prison because he had other clients there. And that just really resonated with me in terms of this when I went to make that trip. And then I go back to thinking about the horror of what we've witnessed during these executions and many others, and in many of the work that all of you do as criminal defense lawyers and as attorneys. And the horror is, was something that I kept repeating in my head as I watched my client, Dustin Honkin, be executed. And that comes from the movie Apocalypse Now, which I'm sure a lot of you have seen. And there's a scene where Brando is, out in the jungle, and all of the atrocities that he's witnessed and participated in probably had him just whispering the horror, the horror, the horror. And I found myself whispering that in my head for the way too long time that it took them to kill Dustin Honkin. But that is the horror of what we deal with, and we have to figure out how to deal with it. And then the third concept is the honor that we have to represent the most marginalized people in our society, especially those who are condemned to death. And it is an honor to represent them, and I've always felt that way. And so that's still how I feel, even with all of this anger. So I guess the bottom line for me right now is how I'm feeling is that, if we can harness that anger, and if we can find the courage to deal with the horror of the things that we have to deal with doing this work, then we'll be able to honor our clients in the past, our clients now, and our clients in the future. Honor them by thanking them for being able to represent them, and by giving them the most magnificent representation that is available on the planet. So that's kind of where I am today. I don't know where I'll be tomorrow. I appreciate you all listening to my thoughts here, and I look forward to seeing you all in person as soon as possible.
Hi, my name is Maurice Shama, and I am the author of Let the Lord Sort Them, The Rise and Fall of the Death Penalty, which is a book that, as the name suggests, argues that capital punishment is disappearing in the United States. And I really think this is largely due to the work of defense lawyers, including many who represent people on death row pro bono. They have managed to educate the public over the last 2 generations about the many problems that have plagued the American death penalty since the 1970s, including inadequate resources for trial defenders, prosecutorial misconduct and myopia, and political motivations among district attorneys, judges, and governors. I turned in the final draft of this book just as the Trump administration was announcing that it was going to restart federal executions, and I covered elements of the execution spree last year for the Marshall Project, where I work, including the cases of Daniel Lee and Lisa Montgomery. I still think the death penalty is disappearing. The numbers bear that out, but the Trump administration's executions show that the punishment is still very much a part of American life. More than 2,500 people remain on death row across the country, and technically they could face execution if the political circumstances in their state or in the federal government change. But what happened under Trump also surprised me, where in the 1990s, lawyers for people on death row were ostracized for representing those people. Now they are being welcomed into the conversation, and the public isn't just hearing about the crimes committed by those facing execution. They're also hearing about Lisa Montgomery's childhood traumas and mental illness. They're hearing about Brandon Bernard's limited role in his crime and his personal transformation behind bars. And they're hearing about Orlando Hall's remorse and the racial injustices that marred his case. This all, to me, represents a seismic shift. And in a way, by reviving the death penalty, the Trump administration forced Americans to think about whether they really want this punishment to continue. And I really think it was because of lawyers, often working pro bono, that this public conversation is happening.
Hi, I'm Katie Ali. I'm a partner at the law firm Hogan Lovells in Washington, D.C. And along with an incredible team of colleagues from Hogan Lovells and 2 other incredible lawyers, Rob Owen and Marcy Witter, I represented Orlando Hall. The Hogan Lovells team, who I worked with, got involved in this case on a moment's notice. And from that moment, worked around the clock, literally, sometimes pulling 22, 23-hour days and nights. In the weeks leading up to Orlando's execution, I think we were involved for 4 or 5 weeks. We filed 20 briefs and motions in 5 different courts. 16 of those briefs were filed in the 72 hours leading up to Orlando's execution. And I obviously wish the result had been different. And I think the pace with which this litigation happens, which was no fault of Orlando's, no fault of his longtime lawyers, but really was the fault of the government, having waited 13 years to set a date and then rushing to get this through amid a pandemic. It just shows how arbitrary the system is. I think that no court, Orlando had incredibly meritorious claims, and no, it wasn't even that they were denied, it was that no court ever actually considered them on the merits. And we see this over and over again. Orlando deserved a different result, but I'm so grateful to the team who represented him for fighting so hard on his behalf.
Last year, when the federal government initiated its spree of super spreader executions, we saw the best and the worst of the criminal legal system at work. Many of us were shocked at the bloodlust and speed of 13 executions over the course of 6 months. My personal experience deals with the Lisa Montgomery case. And there I saw the best in the criminal legal system and what we're here tonight to celebrate. The ways in which you, the law firms, stepped up to help all of us who were fighting to save our clients last year. In Lisa Montgomery's case, many of the firms and attorneys involved were former recipients of the Guiding Hand of Counsel Award, which speaks to the commitment and the importance of that award. We had 3 law firms, a legal clinic, the ACLU, and multiple resource counsel across the country helping us. O'Melveny and Myers gave us Megan Vergal and Alex Scherenbeck, who worked together with Sandra Babcock, Zora Ahmed, and Joe Margulies and their team at Cornell to represent Lisa in fighting for her right to have a fair clemency process. Morgan Lewis joined with the ACLU, attorney Michael D'Agostino and Robin Nunn, as well as Brian Stoll, Cassie Stubbs, David Fati, and others, working to help us improve the conditions that Lisa found herself in, which worked. Lisa was treated horrifically, but through their assistance, we were able to improve her circumstances just a little. And then we had amazing resource counsel, Denny LaBeouf and Mark Olive, who worked with us to craft the Ford litigation, which received a stay of execution from a judge in Indiana who was appointed by Donald Trump. Sadly, we saw the shadow docket at work. Lisa had 4 stays of execution in the final days of her life, and in the last 48 hours, we watched them one by one be picked off. It was the best of the legal system, and it was the worst of the legal system. And I would be remiss if I did not give acknowledgement to the amazing work of Laura Burstein and the Capital Litigation Communications Project, hosted by Squire Patton Boggs. Laura and her amazing team helped us to lift up the message of injustice in Lisa's case. At the end of the day, we were not able to save Lisa, but we were able to give Lisa dignity and to spread the word about the injustice that is done to women in our system, women who are victims of human trafficking. And the amazing Ed Ungvarsky, who gave us his time pro bono to work on Lisa's case, shared with us an email after Lisa's execution about how what happened to her was discussed in the Virginia legislature during the abolition movement there in Virginia. Though we did not save the lives of those 13 men and women, we made a difference, and that difference is continuing to resonate and will continue to resonate. And I am so grateful to all of you who stepped up to help us in this fight.